Okay, this is about how to process ashes from your fireplace or wood stove to make soap. Ashes come out of the wood stove with lots of junk, and you don't want that. So you need a sieve. I use an archaeological sieve because I've got them. Scoop it up and just sieve it in here. A couple of things to keep in mind when doing this. You'll get a lot of this little junk. So have something to put that in. The little stuff in our case also has like nails and staples, pieces of bone. But most importantly, it's got charcoal. Charcoal. You don't want the charcoal in there. Charcoal is bad because it's active. And when you start leaching your lye, it will take part of the hydroxides out of the solution. It will dilute your lye solution. So you want to take as much of the large particles out as you can. Second thing to keep in mind is wear gloves. This stuff is caustic. It'll eat your hands. It might not be all that unwise to wear a mask as well.
But she doesn't do it because she doesn't really care.
I do, but I can't talk with a mask on.
Yeah, good point.
So you do it kind of downwind, so it goes away from you. Well, you go fast. And you just keep sieving.
And do not wear pajamas, it sticks to it.
Yep, it does. Another thing to keep in mind is that ashes have different qualities. Depending on how they are burned, how complete they are burned, how hot they are burned, you get a different ash. The grey ashes they have more carbons in there, carbonates, so you get a darker lye. The white ashes have less carbonates in, you get more hydroxides, and you get a stronger lye. And we found that the old stove and things like fireplaces and outdoor bonfires, they make grey ash. So you get really nice brown lye, which makes a nice brown soap. But it's a less strong quality, so you've got to evaporate it to get to the right strength. So it takes more energy to get to the same strength as using high quality ashes. High quality ashes in period were called white ashes. They came from high efficient charcoal stoves, and they would make nice strong lye. So they had both. White ashes were also sold to industries who needed very strong lye, like for instance the dyeing industry. So now I've got half a bucket full of this powder. So the next step is to make sure that this is tight. Another reason why you want to wear gloves. So now my half bucket compacted to a third. So you do this a couple of times while you're sieving to make sure it is nice and tight. You want to have it as tight as possible because you want the water to go down slow. The faster it goes down, the less of a reaction you have and the lower amount of hydroxides you're leaching out. So you want it to sit in there, which is also why this is still a closed bucket. I didn't drill the filter hole yet. Normally I can't find my drilled bucket at the moment, but normally I would use a bucket that has a hole already. And it's a good scale because if I put in the water too fast and it starts dripping, then I know I'm doing it too fast. And I slow down. So to get back on the black ash and the white ash, or the grey ash and white ash, we changed stoves. We bought a new high efficiency stove a couple of years ago. Since then, my ash is much whiter. I actually get occasional white ash, or like the top layer of my ashes are pure white ash. It's also called fly ash, because when you breathe on it, it is so light, it'll fly away. So you've got to be careful if you want to harvest it.
No!
The whole nail in there. Don't want them.
Why not?
Yeah, don't need the metals. They're fairly inert, it doesn't matter that much, but it's not necessary.
You got ashes on the camera.
I ain't getting ashes everywhere. So another thing, don't do this indoors.
I think she tried that the first time.
No, I didn't.
Did? I thought you did.
Well, anyone who has a wood stove and has cleaned an ash drawer
Knows why.
knows not to do this inside.
And you're spilling a lot.
Oh, yeah, there's an edge there. Make sure got everything.
Can you show us the inside of the bucket again? But hard.
So that was good.
Are you, Mama?
Yes, I will. One moment.
Because I'm already zoomed in.
It's getting tall. It's getting heavy.
Don't make it too heavy, because then you can't pour it into whatever you're leaching it in.
Well, the safe way of doing this leaching, because you're not allowed to put too much water in at a time, is to make sure that the bucket is almost full, because then you can't put more in than a little bit at a time. So I normally go for about an inch under the rim of the bucket, fill that up, it'll slowly go in. So the one thing difference between wood ash soap and regular lye soap is not that one is made with wood ash and one is made with lye. Both are made with lye. But the hard lye soap that you buy in a store is made with a different kind of lye. It's made with a sodium lye made from a sodium source, so it's sodium hydroxide. This is made from a different source. This is potassium hydroxide. The big difference between sodium and potassium is hardness, crystal size. Potassium has a much larger crystallic structure, which means soap is not very hard. Sometimes it keeps shape, but most often when you add some water to it, it just becomes a mush really quick. It's good stuff to make liquid soap with.
You're almost at 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm almost at 1 inch. So potassium makes good liquid soap. Bar soap is made with sodium hydroxide. In period, that would have been made by burning marine plants, which are sodium based. This is burned from land plants, which are potassium based. And using the sodium lye made from Barilla, you can make a hard bar, like we do now. But our lye is not made by burning plants anymore. Our lye is made chemically. Okay, so I've got about this much. 1 finger comb. It's nice and sturdy. It's heavy.
Of course it is.
Yep, well tamped down.
This is her putting water in.
About 1 inch at a time. And then we'll just let this sit and soak.
Bubbles!
Okay, this is part 2 of leaching lye out of wood ashes. I've got a big 5 gallon of condensed wood ashes that we received a couple days ago. We had some good weather, so we were gardening, and now we have bad weather, it's raining, so we're gonna make the lye. It's been sitting in water for a couple of days, so this should be nice and strong. It's lye mud. So to tap it, we're gonna drill a tap hole. Gonna put a little bit of fabric in. And this is going to be really boring, because it will take a long time before anything starts happening. If you look, see? That's because this is more mud than actual liquid, and I want it to be like that because I want it to drain slowly, taking away with it as much hydroxides as I can. This is a fairly high quality wood ashes that we get from our high efficiency Jotol stove. So I got 2 jars of 2 straight leaches of lye. This is high quality, which means a pretty complete firing, I guess, combustion. And the carbonates are pretty much all burned away, so you don't get a lot of color leaching. When the carbonates are not burnt away as much, you get brown. More color, less hydroxides. So this needs to be evaporated, needs to be condensed. This often doesn't need to be condensed, or not very much, maybe like 10-20%. This on average needs to be condensed about 75%. So that'll be step 3. Step 2 is going to be really boring, because all we're going to do is watch it drip. This is about the drip that I want. Drip, 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 drip. If you start pouring it out, you're going too fast. If not much dripping happens, then put a little bit more water on it. The more water height you have on here, the more water pressure you have, the faster it will go through. So in period they didn't have plastic buckets, but they did have barrels. And they were using barrels even up to colonial times. They would put in a filter bed to help with keeping the sediment out, which was often a layer of sand and a layer of gravel and a layer of straw, and the ashes were on that. There was also leaching with just a basket. They'd pack it in a basket, it would run through really fast, and what they would do is they would get that, put it back on top, and go through several iterations. We don't need to do that because this goes pretty fast. If you can, it doesn't hurt. The hydroxides you have, you're not going to lose, unless there's charcoal in there, but you make sure to get that all out. And you might get a few more, but I've done that. When they did the initial experiments, I did that, and I never really found that it really increased my strength all that much if I used a good saturated solution, and if I let it leach slowly. Slow is the key part. So this is actually going pretty well. I'll add some more water. I'll keep about, you see this inch? So the rest of the day I'll keep an eye on it, and I'll keep adding inch and inch of water and keep it going through until I have about 1 pence worth. So how do I know when I'm done? Well, good morning, my little kitty. How do we know when I'm done leaching? One of the things, if you've got a brown, and I'm actually getting a nice brown. So there's a bunch of...
keep your head out.
There's a bunch of charcoal or carbonates in here. So one of the things that you can look for is for the color to run more clear. But you can get a more clear color happening before the hydroxide starts slowing down. But in general, it's kind of... They tend to happen at around the same time, and it is also a period way of checking, looking at the color. You can also put your finger in, stick it on your tongue, and I'll demonstrate that later, but I'm not going to do it right now because it's coming out pure strength right now, and I know it's going to zap me. So it's not going to burn any holes in your tongue, but it's going to feel like you're stuck your tongue to a 5-volt battery. So don't try that unless there's an actual reason for it. And later on, when this starts running more clear, then I will do that because it's actually the most effective way of checking it. Tip of your tongue. So I'll add a little bit more water, and then we'll go back to occasionally taking a movie, show you how the bucket is filling or the pan is filling, and that is about exciting as it gets. So in general, soap making is a many-day project because the first day you pack your ash, you fill the bucket up and let it sit overnight. The next day you start draining it, and it might take 2 days, kind of depends. Then the third day, the lye needs to be heated and condensed. Needs to be evaporated and made into the right strength. And then it needs to be cooled back down. So the fourth day, you can start making soap. So I tend to see making the lye and making the soap as 2 different steps. And I'll make this in advance when I'm feeling like it, and then when I want to make soap, I have it sitting. But, and they know this in period 2, lye does not last very long. It reacts to the atmosphere, and it doesn't actually oxidize. It does it the other way around. It's a redox, but I'm not a chemist, so I can't quite explain that. All I know is that instead of using the oxygen in the bucket on top to decompose, what it's doing, it's in the decomposition, it is releasing oxygen until there's a balance and becoming less hydroxide. So the hydroxides are losing their oxygen and falling apart in their water components. So we don't want to have that happen because then it's not as strong. So you get about a year's worth. These are old. I use them for my classes, so I'm not going to use any of those to do the soap making itself with. That's what this will be for. Okay, let's get some water. If you're doing this for an A&S project and you're running out of time, by all means you can rush it. This is just more efficient. But if you've got a lot of ashes, you don't have a lot of time, just run it through, go fast, and just start with a large volume of liquid and evaporate it down. You might have half an hour more of evaporation to get the same strength, but sometimes that's what you need to do. What people in period also did when using very low quality ashes was strengthen them with lime. Make a slake lime and ash solution. Again, that is to boost the amount of hydroxides. That doesn't mean that without lime you can't make lye to make soap. It just means that you need a little bit more liquid volume to evaporate down into the right concentration. It all makes hydroxides, is the amount of hydroxides that's the difference. And for us doing A&S experiments and projects, it doesn't really matter that much. We're doing a small quality, we're using fairly high quality wood stoves, most of them at least. If you're using a fireplace or an outdoor fire pit, it might be a little different. But also, we're not doing this for commerce. We're not. This is not our income. This is not our family job, I guess. Can't think of the word right now. It's profession. That's what. It's not our family profession, so we don't have to be very efficient about it. We can always get more ash. And back then that might have been a resource. It was used by many different professions. So you wanted to get as much as you could out of it. And limestone was something you could mine right out of the dirt in the right areas. And I think in certain areas limestone was cheaper than ash, and that was why they strengthened it out, so they didn't have to use as much ash. So this is going to sit for a while. Once this runs down, I'll add more water, and we'll keep doing it for the rest of the day and tomorrow. So it took a couple of days, but I leached out 1 panful of lye. There is actually more lye in here. I could keep leaching, and one of the ways to check is when this is damp, feel it and put a little bit on your tongue. Yeah, nice and strong. So we are going to evaporate this down. Well, first we're going to put in an egg. Then we're going to evaporate it down until we get the right density to make soap with. And the way to figure that out is by using a fresh egg, which is kind of cool. Also, this is wood ash lye. This is not sodium hydroxide lye. This is not what you buy in the store. I can put my finger in here and I'm fine. This is high in the pH 10, perhaps pH 11. We did some tests, and that's it. It's not pH 14. This also means that you can't really use any commercial soap making recipes because the amounts are not correct. You cannot use... Oh, and that's another thing. You can do this with the kids and the cats and everybody around, because it is not any more harmful than full strength vinegar or alcohol, like anything that you don't want to put in an open wound. That's this. Not like the lye that I use downstairs to make my goat's milk soap with. That is something else. Okay, so today we are going to do the next step of the lye. I have a large pan of lye. I have some fresh eggs for my friends who has chickens in the backyard. This one was laid 2 days ago. Normally I get them earlier, but yesterday my kitchen was full of brewing equipment, so I couldn't quite get to it. We're in quarantine, so getting eggs is a trial and error. We happened to be able to get some. So I have set up my density test, regular water, straight lye, and the strength that I want. And I'll show you a couple of things that you've got to be aware about. First thing, is this technique medieval? Yes, it is. It goes back to the 14th century, but it's very rare and it wasn't used for commercial soap making. I have a feeling that in the early days of soap making, the soap makers could see and would harvest the fresh soap from the batch and keep cooking the rest. That's what the recipes seem to indicate. This is more of a Renaissance recipe, and we can see these recipes with the egg, and the measured amounts show up in the 16th century in the books of secrets, like the Girolami books, the Master Alexei books. So I like them because they leave less room for error, and they don't need experience. Doing soap the medieval way, you need to know what to look for. It's and it's totally different from modern soap making to begin with, but it's also very different from any of the type of cooking that we are used to. So, getting back to the eggs, first we check the egg for freshness, so it goes into regular water. it needs to lay with its butt and its point, that part and that part, on a horizontal line. You'll see that the butt is slightly up. Keep that in account. And if you have an egg that is a little bit more up, then you just have to have the egg be a little higher on the other end of your density test. So that's why you want to know how much deviation do you have on this end, so you can do a little bit more deviation on the other end. So in average you're on about the same amount. So does this work for modern lye? I wouldn't try it because it's too inaccurate. Does it work for wood ash lye? Making the medieval slow cooked soap? Totally works. It's no problem whatsoever. So it feels very inaccurate, but apparently the egg works fine. So I've done it several times now, and I like it. So we are going to take this one out, and then we put it in. This is straight from the leaching. Sorry. Put it in here. That is a very strong lye. So this is the problem I'm having with my high efficiency wood stove. We have a lot of white ash, and the white ash has a lot of hydroxide, and I'm getting very strong lye. So even though I have the tannin, I do also still have, the tannin means a less complete combustion. I do still have a lot of white ash, so the amount is high. And this is why you need to test it, because you don't always know. A lot of times you get this and your egg is kind of going up, the butt is trying to get up, but it can't quite get off the ground. Then you need to cook it. And I thought I was going to have to cook it, but no. So what do? If there's too much hydroxides and the egg floats too tall, because that's the egg is showing density, how many parts of hydroxides are in solution and keeping the egg floating up. So right now I have too many parts. So all you have to do is add water. So here I have a dilution. I'll put the egg in, and you'll see it's a floaty egg. I like my egg to hang in between in the middle. That gives a very nice body type soap. And I got to that realization again from the books of the Master Alexei series. He is talking about a hair soap, a shampoo, 16th century shampoo. And the egg had to be swimming between the waters, which took me forever to figure out, until I figured out that, oh my god, he just means it floats in the middle. So my egg is now swimming between the waters, and I found that when I use that I get a very nice mild hand soap as well. So that's what I want. Which means there's this humongous amount, we'll have to dilute it. And I'll just use the egg until I have the right amount. Next up, what happens if you have an egg that isn't fresh? This egg, this is my quarantine egg. I thought, oh, it's fine. Put it in. It floats by itself. So you cannot use just any egg, because if you put this egg in something like that, see the amount that's up? You're getting a wrong, the reading won't work. So you have to always check your egg and make sure it's one that is near horizontal with this butt. So the neat thing about when you can evaporate is that again you're changing density. And what happens with density when you change it is that certain things like to be in solution more than others. And I found that when I would heat my lye to evaporate and concentrate it, that, and this is with wood ashes from an open fire or fireplace, not a wood stove, that I would consistently have to evaporate to about 25% of the original volume, and things would settle out of solution when I would cool it down. And this is a little jar with stuff that settled out of solution. It's not as much as I did because I gave a whole bunch away to have tested, but I didn't hear anything back yet. This stuff is salts. They're metal salts and they're very heavy. So what I'm thinking is that I'm having heavy metals from the wood, because remember, we're burning everything. So the wood ashes create a lye that has hydroxides, but it also has other chemicals in it. And the chemicals that don't enjoy the same solution as hydroxides, because hydroxides really like to be in solution. They really like to be dissolved. Other chemicals don't like to be dissolved as much. But when you change the density and when you change the temperature, they will fall out. They will crystallize out of solution. So that means that if you have weird stuff, or if you have lye that needs to be evaporated, then you can get rid of unwanted chemicals you don't need in your soap making by letting them settle out. And I did find medieval mentions that certain lyes had something in it that would hinder the soap making, that it just wouldn't want to saponify. I'm thinking that this might be it, that certain trees have something, a chemical, I don't know what, but a chemical, and that's why certain recommendations are for soap making, like bean straw, grass, stuff that makes high white ash volume, but not a lot of metal salts. So I thought that was a neat little tidbits. And once I have my full solution ready, we will start our soap making setup. But that will be tonight, because I let it set overnight for a while. So this is the part where we're actually going to make soap. We made our lye. That was a two-step process. I have my olive oil, and I will combine the two and make medieval soap. So there's a few things right from the start to think about. I'm not wearing any protective gloves and a mask. I normally do when I'm making commercial soap, which is from sodium hydroxide or sodium lye, which is pH 14. You can't go any higher. pH 14 is the highest in the alkaline scale. It'll eat through your skin. This is not the same. This is made from wood ash, but it's also not the same strength. What you leach out of your wood pile is not the same as the commercial sodium lye that you get from crystal, from chemically pure dissolved crystals. This is only in the upper pH 10. Soap that is the more alkaline soaps themselves are already pH 10. So this is not an issue at all. Do you want to leave it on your skin indefinitely? Probably not, but I don't want to do that with vinegar either. And vinegar, and this is, one is acidic, one is alkaline, but they're at around the same strength. You don't want to get it in an open wound, it will really sting, but it won't harm unless you do something stupid, like getting it in your eye, which is why I have glasses. So, that's the first thing. The second thing you'll see is that when I'm measuring opposite. Normally with commercial lye, pH 14 lye, I would have about a pound in lye liquid and about 3 times as much in, or maybe even up to 4 in oils, fats and oils, depending on the saponification factor of the fats and oils. But on average, I do in quarts, so that's 1 quart of lye mixture on about 4 quarts of fats and oils. 3 quarts, 4 quarts. This is the other way around. Because of the much lower pH, we are using more lye than we're using oil. Which is kind of interesting, because you'd think, well, it's that much less strong. Like each step is times 10. So it's like times 10, times 10, times 10 less strong. You can't make soap out of that because there's nothing left. If you do the same amount, if you decrease the volume by the same amount as the perceived decreased strength, there'd be nothing left. This really confused me, but I'm not a chemist, so I just went like, whatever, stuck it together, and I made soap. So a chemist might be able to explain. All I know is this works. We did the pH tests, it's in the upper 10s, maybe 11, that's it. And it still makes totally fine soap. So we are going to measure. I want 3 pounds in weight of this. Perfect. 3 pounds. I'm going to put that in my crock pot. And then I'm going to get my 1 pound of oil. Almost there. £1. This is kind of important. Do not turn this on. This is night. The first step is only put them together cold and infuse them overnight. The cool thing is that you might be able to see 2 things that were talked about in period texts. One is that one of the descriptions, because all this volume stuff is new. This is Renaissance type soap cooking. The Book of Secrets, the Secrets of Master Alexei of Piedmont. He is using the same 1:3 measurements. A lot of other manuscripts of around that time and later are using similar 1:3 measurements. But before, because you need, as we've seen in a previous episode on making the lye, you need an egg to get the right strength. So you can do measurements. They were just putting them together and harvesting the ripe soap as it went. So how did you know you had enough soap? Had enough oil. So one of the things that is really cool that you see can happen is when you put the oil in here, there is immediate change in color. And I think that what one of the manuscripts was talking about, you put in enough oil until it is good. That very likely indicated to the person who done it before that you go and you can see there's no oil left. There's no oil sitting on top. All the oil has been incorporated into the lye. So I think that's a good hint. I also know I'm good because we used the egg that we measured before. Another neat thing in the manuscripts is that they were talking about fermenting. We ferment overnight. What they meant, not particularly fermentation as in making cheese or making wine. What they're meaning is the medieval definition of fermentation, or ferment, and that is to change from one property into another. And that's what's happening. You're having the saponification very slowly infusing throughout this. So when we start heating it, it'll be more complete and it'll be faster. It still takes forever. Don't get me wrong. It's not something you do in an 8-hour day. But it doesn't take a whole lot of looking after either. So I'm going to let this sit overnight. It's nice and white. I want it to look like milk. Put the lid back on and let it sit. About my equipment, pretty much everything can be used for food because this is not that caustic. The only thing I would hesitate with reusing is the crock pot, and not because that you don't want to eat the lye, but because the lye, because it's cooked for so long, is etching the inside of the crock pot. So it's no longer shiny. It's very dull, and at one point parts of the glaze are probably going to chip off. So you do want to have a dedicated medieval soap crock pot. You don't need a dedicated whisk or other devices. Those will be fine. Okay, so now we're letting it sit. We're letting it sit until it's good. See you in the morning. So it's the next day. As you can see, it looks good, nice and mixed. We'll mix it again and get a beautiful pearlescent texture. There will always be some separation of the oil and lye. And you feel when you start whisking that you'll get more resistance. And that's the saponification. That's good. You can also use a stick blender. That makes it a little faster. But it's not really necessary. And since this is a medieval soap, I figured I'll use the stick blender for the hot process. Or the cold process, sorry. So technically, this is not a cold process soap, but this is not a hot process soap either. Well, in a way, that hot process, there's two types of hot process. There is a at boil hot process, and there is a boiling hot process. And the one that modern people know when they're using a crock pot is the boiling hot process, where the soap separates and then comes back together and separates, comes back together, and you cook it right through all those stages. And you end up at a soap that only needs 2-3 days to cure, to harden, and then it can be used. Cold process soap is done at, it's not quite room temperature, but it's pretty close. It's either 90 degrees or 120 degrees, depending if you're using oils or fats. That one, all you wait for is trace thickening, like pudding. And when you've got the pudding thickness, then you stop it and you pour it into your molds, and then you let it sit for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, for it to cure, for it to finish the saponification on the interior, and then you have soap. This is kind of in between. This is right at boiling, but it never separates. And that's what makes this work so well. Because you don't have the stages of separation to really freak people out. But it's still a finished soap at the end. Because that's the thing with that's mousse. That's the thing with the wood ash soap making. You can't do it at a cold process because you don't quite know the strength of the lye. And this hot process, that works. So if you've seen people online trying to make medieval soap using modern techniques, maybe even modern ingredients like sodium hydroxide, unless they're making like Mediterranean hard soap, which is like the olive oil soap, Marseille soap, Castile soap, sure. But the Northern European black soap, the soft soap, nope, that's totally different. So now we turn it on hot, and that's it. I'll check back in every hour to half hour. I won't touch it unless it really scums up at the edges. There's no continuous whisking with this method. That would be the complete boiling hot process. And what we need to look out for, the first sign, is bubbles. So I want to be down here before it bubbles over. But other than that, just keep an eye on it, have your lid closed, and your temperature on high. And always put it on a, what do you call this, dining plate? Platter. Because if you do miss it, and it does boil over, the soap still is caustic, so it will damage whatever table you're using. Plus now I can just scoop it up and put it back in. It's not a real big issue. So this is the first hour. We have a tiny bit of bubbling at the edges. And that's it. It's very exciting. So we'll keep checking in every hour and keep you updated. So here we are at the second hour, and we're definitely getting bubbles. They're all generating from the outside, of course, outside in. And I'm not taking the lid off on purpose, because the moment I take the lid off, it'll all collapse back down, because we lose the heat. It needs that build-up heat to really get it going all the way around. So, no mixing unless there's real big crud build-up. And for that we have our spatula. And no messing with it until it totally bubbles up. And we're not quite there yet. So hour 2. We'll see you next at hour 3. So here we are at hour 3. And we're getting some good soap action happening. And we'll just keep it going until the whole thing foams up. And just before it escapes from under the lid, we go to the next step. This is mesmerizing. This is actually the only bit of the whole soap making process that looks like something's happening. The rest is fairly boring. So I'll probably check back in half an hour or so. It takes about 3-4 hours to get to the first step. And we're right on the ballpark. At hour 4, and things are happily bubbling away. Well, I've been checking in every half hour now, but it doesn't look like it was quite necessary yet. But the saponification is working. We have bubbles. So we're at hour 7. We're having complete bubbling, but it hasn't come all the way up yet. So we'll just keep at it. It's looking good. So now we're at hour 8. We're getting a lot more bubbles happening. It's about half full with bubbles, big bubbles. So we're getting close to the end of the first stage. It's also 8 o'clock at night. So I'm not sure I'll be able to finish this in one go. This takes about 8 to 10 hours. I thought I started at 10, but I have forgotten to plug it in. So we started at 11. So from 11 midnight, we'll see if it works or not. It's better to just let it go than to force it. And it's mesmerizing looking at the bubbles. And here I came just half an hour later, and voila, we have cookover. So we're going to let that down. And then we'll scoop most of it back in. This is all soap, by the way. This is doing beautifully. If only I didn't take the time for dinner. So, put it all back in. Beautiful, beautiful soap. So you can see it better. It's thickening up. It's kind of pearlescent. Normally I would do this in the kitchen so I could really see and keep an eye on it, but with the everybody being at home and all that, it isn't really working out so well. So I have it down here. That's why I keep running back and forth. Oh, perfect. A little piece of wood in between the lid, and that should be enough to keep it from boiling up again. And we only have a tiny bit of spillage, so it's actually not that bad. Last time it boiled over, I had big foams of soap all over the edge. So another reason why you want to use a dedicated crock pot, because it'll get soapy. So it's about midnight and we are having tectonic plates. I'll show you. Lots of bubbles. Ooh, lots of finished soap. This looks good. Everything is bubbling up. And I had a nice roll from the bubbles from the outside, rolling itself in. I call that the tectonic plates. That means it's doing well. Not too much scabbing on the outside. So we are going to turn this off for the night. You did well, and we might actually have soap tomorrow. It's so happy sounding. So it's the next morning, it's cooled down. You can see a nice formation of soap nodules in there, but there's still some oil and lye around, so we know it's not quite done yet. So we'll keep, see, this is nice soap. Spreading nicely, but not quite incorporated yet. So we'll keep heating it up. Mix it up. And we've also reached the stage of pudding. So I'm going to leave the lid off for now. I'll check back in when it's warm again. Because warm liquids are always a little liquidier than cold liquids. So I might put the lid back on. But the way it is now indicates that it needs to start evaporating. Okay, actually the lid helps get it warmed up quicker, so we'll put it on now, and then in the next session we'll take it off. Yeah, it looks really good. It's too bad I ran out of time. I think I only needed another hour or two and it would have been it's about done. 2 hours later. Okay. Things are really drying out and bubbling up. There was still a little loose liquid at the bottom, not very much, and this is getting nicely bubbly and applesauce thick, so we're going to leave the lid off for now. Let it dry out. We should get tectonic plates. It is now 3.5 hours after I started it for the second day, and we are at the tectonic plate stage where it's turning from the outside in. And we'll just leave it at it. It's mesmerizing to look at. It just slowly keeps turning. And you can see it's drying out. It's got a drier areas. Skin forming. So the soap came all the way back up. This is why you don't want to have the lid on, because it'll creep right underneath. Just beautiful foam. Seems to be all incorporated. There's no liquid left. When we whisk it down, yeah, and it starts to get a sheen to it. It's like looking like Vaseline. So it's around about 5 hours after we started, so I think I'm going to call it a day. This looks good. So I've cooked soap in one full day. Started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you get a more translucent soap. This soap, if I find if I do it in 2 steps, the soap itself gets a little harder. So it's even you can mold it a little bit, which is pretty cool. But whether it's really liquid, like liquid soap, modern liquid soap, or if it mimics a bar, excuse me, a bar soap, it still behaves as a liquid potassium hydroxide soap when you put it in water. So the moment you get a little bit of this soap and do your hands with it, it immediately falls apart. It doesn't stay a bar like sodium hydroxide soap. So it's nice to have a harder bit because it's easier to partition out. But honestly, I have a big jar that I just scoop out. And that is fine with me too. So once you get to the stage where this happens, where the soap, when you go through, boop, it stays like that. That is even talked about in the Secrets books. For instance, the one of The Secrets of Master Alexei Piemont. And that means that the soap is good. So I cooked this one a little further, a little longer than it probably technically needed. But like I said, this way I can do a moldable soap. So I'm going to go grab my mold and I'm going to scoop it all in the mold. So, scooping everything out, go into the mold. I like to use, what is this stuff called? Silicone. I like to use silicone molds. They're cheap to get, easy to get back out. In period, of course, no silicone, but they did use molds. They would use wooden boxes lined with paper or lined with fabric, and it worked just as well. One of the things that I found interesting is that even in some of the recipes that I found online, because this technique seems really simple, this took me like a year to figure out how to slowly cook the soap, how to get the percentages right, and not to stop too early, because that's another mistake that a lot of beginner soap makers make with the wood ash soap. They stop too early, and they're expecting to get a cold process soap making process. This is not cold process at all. So it looks different, it behaves different, it takes different measurements, percentages, it takes different timing, and it makes a different soap. But it's not that strange, because we started with different ingredients too. So just keep that in mind. One of the funny thing I found, because the first half a dozen that I did on the stove, I did on the wood stove, over an open fire, and then I started using the crock pot, because I noticed that commercial soap making equipment in the Middle Ages were often really big kettles, copper vats on brick furnaces. It's still wood fired, but a brick furnace gives a very even, long and even heat. And I'm like, I don't have a long even heat, but I do have crockpot, which gives a long even heat. So this might actually not be that far off from a medieval commercial large batch soap process, soap making. Well, one of the recipes that I found, I don't think that was a commercial recipe at all. I think it was someone who was making soap for the household, and they weren't quite figuring out what they were doing wrong, and they were too much into the completely hot, the boiled hot process, and it kept falling apart, and it didn't quite have the measurements right. So it was either too much lye, too much fat, and they were fiddling, adding more, taking off. And you could really see in the recipe from the little tidbits that they put in there, like if this happens, then you can compensate with that. When I started making this soap on a more regular base and succeeded, I'm like, oh, they are compensating for recipe faults that the late 16th century recipes are starting to account for. So they don't have to do that anymore. And one of the cool things, and that's what made me think of it, is at the very end of that recipe, he's talking about that you then put it in wooden bowls, and you want to use wood, because wood has openings, and it leaches out. So if you have excess lye, it'll leach out and go away. And that is exactly what happened when I did a higher lye density batch, where my egg was floating all the way on the top, and I had a little too much lye in there, that there wasn't enough oil to capture the lye, and I had excess lye. And then when the soap, when it's first cooked, it looks fine, but when it ages, cures for a bit, and then gets moisture from the air, because this is a little bit hygroscopic, it pulls moisture from the air, the lye does. So if you've got excess lye, you'll see moisture developing on your soap, and it's a blackish brown, it's a brownish moisture, and that is the lye. Not a big issue, just rinse it off, and that's what that recipe said. Not a big issue, just leave it like that. And it also said if the soap doesn't want to come together, if you have separation in there, just stick it in the mold and hope for the best, and every couple of hours go through and whisk it back up, and that has actually worked as well. Sometimes the soap needs more time. This soap, what I just made, took me 10 hours yesterday and 5 hours today, 15 hours. It'll be a harder soap because I did a longer heating batch, because I missed the midnight mark. It took too long. It wasn't quite there. So that's just all the variables that you'll encounter when making medieval soap. Time, ingredient, process. And a very part of that process is heat. How is the heat applied, and how long for is the heat applied? And if you see any YouTube videos with nice pictures of bar soap at the top, that's not what you make with this. This is what you make. It's a brownish, blobby, slightly translucent, pearlescent soap. But it'll never really look pure white, because for that you need the sodium, the pure sodium hydroxide, without any carbon remnants, no tannin leaching. And it'll never be really white either, because it's cooked for so long. So I hope you all had a good time. It took forever looking at the different steps on how to make soap, and check out my academia profile at Susan Verburg. And if you want to make your own soap and you need more step-by-steps, there's a class handout there that details it step-by-step. If you want to see actual recipes and look up these recipes from the Master Alexei of Piedmont, or what is the other one, the household books, I collated all the soap recipes in one big document, and you're welcome to download and peruse at your interest. And please go forth and make more soap. So it's the next day, and this is the soap that I put in the molds. Little bar soaps. There's no loose lye in the bottom, so I know that they're lye neutral. They are damp, but that is because of the hygroscopic action of they're in the basement, so they'll always be a little damp. So it's semi-hard, but once it is, that's what it's dissolving on my hands. That's because it's a soft soap. So these are the soaps that I took 2 days to cook. I have several batches of this. They look closer to a traditional hot process soap that people make in a crock pot, but it's still a soft soap. They're very melty. This is a soap that I've made within 1 day. It takes about 8 to 10 hours. It is very jelly, very gel-like. And again, this is also a soap that dissolves really easily in water. This is a soap that I did for a demonstration, but I ran out of time, so I put it in a jar. And I can either put it back in the crock pot and recook it, but what I can also do is pour the lye off and scoop this around, whisk it, and use that as a soap. This will be a very a neutral soap. This jelly-like soap is the same as that. That is completely finished. This is not completely finished yet, but it is a soap. It's just not as soapy, not as well formed, well crystalline as that. So this is one that is arrested even further, if even earlier in the process. And I like this one as an example because it shows the different stages of soap. This here, you can't quite see it, but when I look at it from this angle, I can see the light shining off the little crystals that are down here. These are soap crystals. This is very, very dense soap crystals, because soap is a salt crystal, crystallized salt. So here, the soap crystals, you see a little bit of a coarse, grainy look to it. That's because the soap crystals are starting to break up and blossom into full-fleshed soap. And that is full soap. This is at the level of here. So if we cook this further, it will get to that jelly-like level. And if we cook this further and take a lot of the extra moisture out, it's this hard, squishy stuff. So one last thing, because it really shows the difference in the sodium and the potassium hydroxide soaps. Even though this is a solid bar soap, once you would use this, put a little water in it, it just falls apart. I could use this maybe two times, maybe only once in a shower, because it would just fall apart. And that's because it is a potassium soap. And the reason the difference between potassium and sodium soap is so big is because they're different crystals. Potassium soap crystals are relative large crystals. They have long legs between the elements, which gives them a flexibility, which gives them that jelly-like consistency. And potassium lye is still used and used commercially, because that's how one would make pump soap. So if you want to make pump soap, you don't dilute sodium soap. No, you start with a potassium soap. Sodium soap, on the other hand, the connecting points between the crystals are much, much tighter. So it makes a much more tight crystalline structure, and it's a much harder soap, which makes it less easy to dissolve in water. So that is my little how to make medieval soap demonstration. So we go from lye, tested with an egg, with olive oil, cook it forever, and you get a jelly or a bar soap. And pretty much all you need is a crock pot and a whisk and time. And that's all. So I hope to see many people of you out there making soap for yourself, because interestingly, This soap is really nice hand soap. I don't need what do you call it? Moisturizer after I've used it. It makes your hands feel really nice. So it might actually be the perfect soap for nowadays.